Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Josh with Alzheimer's Breakthrough. And what if the solution to cognitive decline wasn't found in a bottle, but in silence, stillness, and stopping what we put in our mouths? Loren Lockman has supervised over 15,000 water fasts and is regarded as one of the world's leading experts on extended fasting and natural healing. He teaches that the body is inherently self-cleaning, self-healing, and self-regulating, and that many chronic diseases can be reversed simply by removing the obstacles to healing, including food itself. His outspoken and controversial views on fasting, fruitarianism, detoxification, and the limits of mainstream medicine have made him a controversial yet influential figure in the longevity and natural health space. Loren, welcome to the show. Let's dive in. So let's go back to the very beginning. What in the world drew you to water fasting as a healing modality?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably a fairly common answer that you will have heard before from people like you and me. I got very sick. I got very sick at 23. Wasn't life-threatening, but I was barely able to function. I went from being a healthy college student, and 6 months after I left school, I was barely able to function. So later diagnosed with chronic fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic sinusitis, systemic candida, and 57 allergies. I spent a lot of my time in bed. It was miserable. And you're an MD who has realized there's other ways, right? Maybe better ways. So this I won't be stepping on your toes too much, I think, but I got much worse with 3 years of medical care. And that's when I woke up and thought, okay, this isn't it. These guys don't seem to know what they're doing. And I thought, I'm going to have to figure this out myself. So the first thing I did, I had begun studying nutrition at 14. I went back to nutrition and realized I was doing everything they said I should be doing. And I thought, okay, that's not it. And I realized that every other species on the planet, when sick enough or badly enough injured, will lay down and stop eating. Your cat will do this, your dog will do this, everything. And so I decided to try fasting. I wound up coming across a book by Arnold Ehret called Rational Fasting. You must know it.
Okay, sure.
That was my first written introduction. I later found Herbert Shelton, who I resonated with much more, put myself in the natural hygiene camp, read everything I could get my hands on. And I mean, it was crazy because literally 6 months after I took it on myself, I was so much healthier that people would come up to me and say, "Oh my God, what did you do? You look amazing. Can you help me? Can you help my spouse? Can you help my kid?" And I didn't set out to do this, but eventually I reluctantly became a health coach because there was so much request for my help. But that was it. And, it's been, let's see, I'm 64. I've been fasting myself now for 38 years, and I've been guiding other people through the process for close to 30. And it's been amazing what I've seen.
Awesome. So you've actually seen thousands of people heal from serious illness. What do we all get wrong about how the body heals?
Well, I think the first thing that most people get wrong is that the body heals. I mean, what people think, and I think, part of it is just maybe human nature. We're always looking for a magic bullet, for some easy solution. And people believe, and perhaps they want to believe, that drugs, herbs, juices, smoothies, superfoods, supplements, et cetera, are going to heal them. When the simple fact is that healing is a biological process. So the only thing on the planet that can heal my body is my body. Okay. And that's what makes fasting so powerful, is because really it's simply the most efficient and effective way to get out of our incredible self-healing body's way, to allow it to do what only the body can do.
That makes sense, because you got this whole system and you have to continue living while you're fixing the system. So
yeah, exactly. In fact, people often, just 2 hours ago, I was talking to a client who will be fasting with me in September, and she was telling me how she's been doing certain things to help deal with symptoms. And I said to her, you understand that you're only treating symptoms, suppressing symptoms for the most part. And you're not really helping yourself. You're not getting healthier as a result of that. In fact, I believe, and every case is different, of course, there might be different situations, but in general, I would suggest, Josh, that every time we manipulate the body in any way, we're creating unintended side effects. And so, the challenging thing sometimes is to be willing to simply allow the body to do what it needs to do when it's not particularly comfortable. It may not feel very good sometimes.
Right. But let's actually dive in there, because one of the things I've noticed when I'm fasting, water fasting, is I can definitely feel uncomfortable. Just to be clear, I'll feel hungry, I'll feel weak, I'll feel dizzy. And to me, it's kind of ironic that going through that process, actually, there's some long-term gain at the end of it.
I wouldn't say it quite that way. I would say not that there's some long-term gain. There's enormous long-term gain. It's huge what happens. But in fact, I'll often tell people that fasting, contrary to your experience, but not really contrary to your experience, fasting isn't painful or difficult. Detoxification is painful and difficult.
Right. But just to be clear, even if I have nothing to eat for 24 hours, which I did last weekend, just drink water.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of energy. I couldn't,
right.
I couldn't work, which I expected that, but it's right. to me, it's a trade-off.
Yeah. I understand. And you're absolutely right. And this is something people have to understand. It's, a lot of people, just today, someone said, I don't have a lot of time off. I'm a single mom. I work full time. How can we make this work? I said, we can't make it work until you can take some time off. The process is about resting as completely as possible. So first of all, as you know, the whole point really is to conserve as much of the body's energy as possible, so the body can use that energy to cleanse and heal. If we're busy throughout the day, whether we're working or doing whatever we might be doing, we're not freeing up that energy so the body can use it to cleanse and heal. But coming back to your experience, I understand that you felt very tired, maybe weak. This isn't because you didn't eat. And this is the piece that I want people to really understand. It's not about the lack of food. I frequently have that experience myself, the experience of not eating for 24 hours. Sometimes I'm just so busy, I don't stop and eat. And that's happened many times. I've also, I use fasting. So I started fasting, as I said, nearly 40 years ago, about 38 years ago. I did a lot of fasting for the first 10 or 12 years. I don't fast anymore to detoxify because I've done that. I fast now when I have injuries. And this will probably sound appalling to you as a doctor, but I have broken 7 fingers, 2 of them twice, both knees, 2 ribs, my tailbone, 2 toes, one of my kneecaps, and my right hip.
Are you a mountain climber? Like, what are you doing?
Rock climbing,
okay.
Skiing, motorcycles, quadricycles, surfing. I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I don't do all those things anymore, but I still do some of them. Mountain biking. So there have been a number of accidents. And when I fast now, I fast generally to heal a particular injury. And aside from the pain I might have in my finger or whatever it is I'm working on, I feel perfectly fine. There's no discomfort. I'm not tired. I don't feel weak. And the reason why is because my body's not detoxifying. So again, it's the detoxification. And, it sounds like for you, it hasn't been particularly difficult. Just, making it clear that this isn't a good time to be doing other things like working, right? But I often say to people, the harder it is to skip a meal, the more meals you probably need to skip.
Right.
Because if you skip one meal, you start detoxifying. There's a lot of work your body needs to do.
It's kind of ironic, and I recently interviewed Professor Walter Longo, and he made the statement that I think is true, is that the majority of Americans or people who you're going to work with really have never had a long fast and got into real ketosis in their life.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's fair. My clients have so far come from 156 countries, almost 12,000 people in 29, almost 30 years. It's true for everyone. I mean, there are very few people anywhere on the planet that have gone 3 days, which is what it typically takes to start to go into ketosis. It takes 10 or 11 days when we've measured ketones to be fully in ketosis for most people. Very few people have ever done that. And unfortunately, chances are good very few people ever will do it, because most people, aren't willing to do what's difficult. Now, fortunately, there are many people who are, but a lot of people shy away from that. They'd rather take the magic bullet.
Right. But for many of the audience here, they have or know people who have dementia or Alzheimer's, and some of the research is now showing that if you can get into a ketotic state, you can actually help reverse or prevent those conditions. So
absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't have a tremendous amount of experience working with people with dementia, only a handful of clients, but we have seen improvements in virtually all of them. I'm just trying to think. Yeah. I mean, with Alzheimer's, there's only been 2 people, and I don't think we could say that there was complete reversal, certainly not, but improvements in every case. And I think it's also important to point out that regardless, I've worked with many people who had terminal illnesses and had been told by doctors that they had weeks, in some cases, to live. In most of those cases, those people did pass as a result of the condition. Someone asked today on social media, how come if fasting is so beneficial, why doesn't it work for X? I think X was cancer. It does in some cases. But the problem, of course, is that sometimes there's been so much damage there. The body is so toxic, so low in energy, vitality, that it may no longer have the ability to heal itself. And I mean, I think it comes back. People often say, well, will fasting heal this? Fasting won't heal anything. Fasting allows your body to heal itself if the body is still capable of doing that.
Right.
Right.
And what I saw was that for fast growing cancer, no, but for slow growing cancer, it could definitely be helpful in terms of reversing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't dispute what you've just said. I don't know, but you may be right. Maybe if it's fast enough growing, it's going to be more challenging. But certainly with slow growing cancers, we've seen a tremendous amount of success. I don't believe there's a better way, and this is always surprising to people, but correct me if I'm wrong. You're the MD here. My understanding is that cancer cells are forming in pretty much every body every day, but in a healthy, with a healthy enough immune function, the body destroys those cells as soon as they arise. Right. So we know that the body theoretically.
Exactly. If you happen to have a healthy immune system, which unfortunately many people do not.
No, of course. Absolutely. But my point is that we know, people are like amazed and think it's nonsense. But come on, the body can't heal cancer. Well, the body's destroying cancer cells. I mean, in the 50% of us that currently today, this may be different in 15 years, that don't get diagnosed with cancer, right? About half the population does. In the half that doesn't, it's because the body is successfully destroying those cells as they form. And so we know the body can do that. The question is, well, we've already grown 1 or more tumors. Can the body still reverse that? And in some cases, the answer is absolutely yes. And in some cases, it may be no, unfortunately, it's maybe too late. Yeah.
Right. So shifting to the brain for a second, what happens in the brain during a 14 to 21 day water fast?
Well, I mean, first of all, I am not a scientist. I'm a layperson who's self-taught. I mean, I did have 2 years of training with people certified to fast people, but I can't tell you what's actually happening inside the brain. But I have an interesting theory that you're the Alzheimer's expert. One of so there's a lot of things that break down with dehydration, right? Our bodies are mostly water, or should be. And when we lose that proper water balance, nothing is going to function the way that it should. There's not a lot of hard numbers that I've seen where we can say, well, for instance, your pancreas is going to work X% as well. But I did see a number that said if your brain is 2% dehydrated, you lose 20% of cognitive function. So the question has, and I came across this like 10 years ago. I've been wondering ever since, well, what if the brain is 10% dehydrated? I mean, that would mean losing 100, if the same ratio would be 100% of cognitive function. Well, that's obviously probably not happening. It may not work that way. But the point is, I mean, we have seen that most people are significantly dehydrated. And I think much more than medicine realizes. One of the significant problems that I see with modern medicine is, well, for instance, around blood pressure, as an example. 120/80 is normal, right? Now, most people think that what that means is that 120/80 is healthy, but normal just means average. It means typical. It doesn't mean healthy.
Right. It doesn't mean ideal. Okay.
No, it certainly doesn't mean ideal. In fact, I believe that systolic pressure should never be higher than 110, and ideally, between 90 and 110. And the diastolic pressure, I've actually come up with a formula that is a little too hard to try to talk about here exactly, but that determines what the pulse pressure, which is the difference between, for the audience, the difference between systolic pressure and diastolic pressure, what that pulse pressure should be based on the systolic pressure. So it's relative, it's proportionate to the systolic pressure. So at 110, it should be 43 points, 47 points, which means 110/63. At 90, which is the bottom of where I believe the systolic pressure should be, it should be 90/50. It's a 40-point range, 40-point spread there. So many people are walking around and they're being told, and I know this only because my clients tell me, hundreds of people a year, well, my doctor said my blood pressure was okay. And maybe the blood pressure is 118/87 or something like that. And they'll think, well, it's not exactly what it should be, but it's close and it's within the range. But the truth is that the narrower that pulse pressure is, the less blood they have. And blood volume, of course, is changing because the body is retiring roughly 2 million blood cells every minute, taking them out of circulation because they're worn out, they're tired, they need to be replaced. That's dependent on water. Blood is mostly water. If there's not enough water available in the body, then blood volume is going to decrease. And so we see that when we can get people's pulse pressure back up, which tells me blood volume is up, the pressure goes up, the pulse comes down, and all kinds of things work much better than they did before. So I'm wondering whether maybe a common factor is that people with Alzheimer's and maybe dementia in general are significantly more dehydrated than people who don't get Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and I think it varies. I find Alzheimer's, you're dealing with between 30 and 200 root causes. Sometimes it could be hydration level. But let me ask you this. From what you said, I'm assuming that you are a fan of water fasting, but not a fan of dry fasting. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I would suggest that dry fasting, my opinion is that dry fasting may be one of the worst things that you can do. I fasted a doctor, I won't mention his name, that you probably have heard of. He's fairly well known in the alternative world. And he worked with me and has referred quite a few people to me. But when I talked about this with the group that he was in, he said, you know what? He was probably 50 at the time. And he said, when I was in medical school, which would have been 27 years ago or earlier, something like that. He said the first thing they taught us about the kidneys is that when we're dehydrated, we're damaging the kidneys. Okay. Now I knew 5 people, 4 of them were clients of mine who had fasted with me. One of them, like 10, 15 years earlier, dead now from dry fasting. And in every case, their kidneys failed. Okay. And the reason for this is very simple. As we become dehydrated, blood volume drops, blood becomes thicker, it's more abrasive. The percentage of stuff the body's trying to get rid of, right? Your kidneys are filtering your blood all the time, nonstop, and taking out of the blood anything that the body doesn't want there. And so the blood becomes more abrasive as blood volume drops. We have the same volume of, let's call it debris, stuff the body doesn't want, but now it's a higher percentage. And so this is damaging to the kidneys. And it's interesting because I think it really highlights a serious issue that people have. One of the things most people think is that if the symptoms are gone, they're healthier, right? I was just talking to a client, and I was reminded of the story of a man I met, a billionaire I met on the beach in just west of Los Angeles. Can't remember what that beach town is called, but I was out there on a lecture tour, and the organizer had tried to get this man, her friend, to come, and he wasn't interested. And she told me they took a walk on the beach every morning. I said, great, call him and ask if it's okay if I join you tomorrow. So he said, yeah, sure. So she had prepared a flyer. This was almost 20 years ago. And at the time, it said on the flyer, Loren hasn't been sick a day in 18 or 19 years. It's now 38 years since I've been sick a single day. So one of the first things he said to me was, I'm never sick either. As if, I don't need to come to your event because I'm good. And I said, well, that might be a good thing. And he said, what do you mean? How could it not be a good thing? And I said to him, well, if you are never sick because your body has no need to detoxify, because again, I think most people don't realize this. I hear all the time, Josh, people say, I don't know if I'm sick or if it's just a healing crisis. And I'll say it's always a healing crisis. That's what being sick is. Your body is detoxifying. That's what a cold is. That's what a flu is. That's what being sick is. So I said, if you don't need to detoxify, then you'll never get sick. But if you never get sick because your body doesn't have the vitality to do the work it needs to do, this is not a positive thing, right? He was 47 years old. He was a billionaire. He had homes around the world. By the end of our conversation, we talked for about an hour as we walked down the beach. When we came back, she said to me, he went into his building. We went to her car, and she said, what do you think? And I said, I think he's in deep doo-doo. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, so I'm a Reiki master, so I can feel people's energy. I stood shoulder to shoulder with him for about an hour, and I said to her, he's got less energy than this parking meter. 2 months later, at the age of 47, he dropped dead in Paris. He told me 6 months, he was going to clear his schedule, come spend a month with me. It never happened. He dropped dead at the age of 47. So most people think, well, if I have no symptoms, I'm healthy. But you may have no symptoms because your body isn't capable of producing them. And what happens, the reason people think they're healing with dry fasting is because water is the universal transport medium. Whether we're talking about through the kidneys, through the colon, through the skin, through the breath, through mucous membranes, without sufficient water, there's no detoxification. So there's the detoxification stops. That means symptoms stop. They think they're healthy, right? And then they die, right? It's interesting because when those people have come to my center, I've probably fasted 30 people or so, and maybe 50 in the last 10 years who had a dry fasting practice. As soon as they're always the most dehydrated people on campus, every single time, the most dehydrated. As soon as we get them hydrated again, all the symptoms come back. So it seems pretty clear. They stopped detoxing. They felt better because their body was not doing what it needed to do. Just as with this billionaire. Okay, the fact that we're not having healing crises doesn't mean we're in good shape.
Right. Let's talk about toxicity and toxins for a minute here.
Sure.
As an example, aluminum. We know that aluminum is a neurotoxin, the metal aluminum. And we also know that aluminum is present in a lot of tap water, drinking water. Aluminum is added as a last step in municipal water to remove particulate matter like leaves. So my question to you is, what type of water do you normally recommend people water fast with? I'm assuming it's not tap water.
Definitely not tap water. Yeah. No, I recommend using spring water. One of the foundational tenets that I've always operated by, I always, over these 40 years or so that I've taken care of my own health and others, is that we'll never improve on nature. So one of the things, in fact, before I found natural hygiene, I was actually giving my first public lecture, and a woman, it was a small group. I think we had like 8 or 9 people show up, right? Because no one knew who I was. And so it was such a small group. We sat around a big table. I sat at the head. At the other end, there was a woman, with I think 4 people on each side. And I asked everyone to introduce themselves. It was that small, that intimate. And the woman at the other end of the table introduced herself and said her name was Mary, whatever, and she was a natural hygienist. Well, I'd never heard that term. I assumed she was some sort of a medical, person. So I was not as confident then as I am now, because again, this is my first lecture, more than 30 years ago. I didn't have much experience. And so I kept saying to her, "What do you think, Mary?" And she kept saying, "I don't know." And I thought, no, this person doesn't know anything. Right here, she is a professional, doesn't know anything. And at the end of the lecture, she came over to me and said, "Have you ever heard of the American Natural Hygiene Society, which is now the National Health Association?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of it. I'd never even heard the term before." I joined. Their annual conference was just 2 months later, and wound up feeling at first. Ultimately, I got away from it again because they were kind of degrading their standards. But I felt like I was at home because here was a group of people who, like me, were at least ostensibly trying to function in accordance with the laws of nature. And that's really what it's about. So what would we do if we lived in nature? Well, what does every other species do? They drink water from springs and streams. Okay, spring water, once it's out of the ground, well, then it's more apt to become compromised in some way. So the best we can do, I believe, is spring water. That's all I drink. And that's what, at my center, I actually bought the site because there was a spring on site, which we had tested regularly.
Right. And I think that's the key. You test it regularly because my concern is, unfortunately, I'm sure it was different hundreds of years ago, but today there's glyphosate and other toxins in the rain, in the rain. It filters into springs. So that's my concern, is the last thing you want to do is drink spring water that happens to have high levels of toxins.
Absolutely. But as I said, we had it tested regularly. I'm in the U.S. now. I'm drinking Mountain Valley in glass bottles. This comes from the mountains in Arkansas. They've been bottling it for 150 years, and it's tested. And there've been a couple of times where they're like, "Oh, well, is this okay?" But I love it. It tastes good. It works really well. A lot of my clients in the U.S. working with me remotely now are drinking this. I don't believe there's anything even close to that. And I know where you were, they used distilled water, which is the product of a machine, right? And it's unnatural because it removes the minerals which are always present in natural water. Even rain contains minerals. So I think there's various issues, and that's why, I believe the best we can do is spring water. Of course, it has to be clean. You have to test it, make sure it's okay. The fact that it comes out of the ground definitely does not assure you that it's okay to drink. There's lots of springs I wouldn't drink from. Next best, I think, is reverse osmosis, because most home machines still leave about 10% of the minerals in, while doing an excellent job with the toxins.
Got it. So you mentioned minerals. What I find interesting is, I don't think, were you doing blood tests on the people you were helping fast?
The only time we ever did blood tests is if we suspected there might be an electrolyte issue, and then we would check the electrolytes. I have everyone test their electrolytes before they start and make sure they're in the normal range. But other than that, no.
Good. So, some people have argued that fasting is stressful to the body. How would you respond to that?
I would say that in some way, so for instance, I've heard, specifically stressful to the kidneys. And it's interesting because I would suggest that the average person's kidneys are dramatically stressed every day, living the way most people do. They're dehydrated. They're consuming all kinds of things that don't belong in the body. That's putting stress on the kidneys and other organs, the liver, of course, and other organs too. So in that sense, actually, when we fast, if we're getting an appropriate amount of water for the body, the kidneys actually have an easier time. In fact, I've actually helped people with kidney disease, including serious kidney disease, heal with fasting. Now, obviously, we have to be much more careful if someone's kidneys aren't functioning at the same, at 100%, then they can't handle taking in as much water as someone who has normal kidney function. But I think now, other than that, is it stressful to the body in some way? I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could make that argument, but on the other hand, it's the most efficient and effective way to allow the body to cleanse and heal. So even if there's some stress to the body, the end result is usually a dramatically higher level of health and functioning in virtually every way.
That makes sense. Let's change the gears here a little bit.
Sure.
And talk about fruit. I think you said it's the most healing food on the planet. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if I ever said that.
Okay.
Because again, I mean, I'm pretty careful about how I use the word healing. The body heals itself. Fruit doesn't heal us. But here's what's true about fruit. So first of all, let me back up, because this sounds radical to most people, right? Most people have trouble imagining that, first of all, what they think of as almost a throwaway. I mean, it could be dessert, could be a snack, but it's not food. It doesn't have everything you need. Most people have trouble imagining this. I think what's true is that there's approximately, it's estimated 25 million, depending on whose estimate you're looking at, 25 million species on the planet. Every one of them has one species-specific diet, just one. Okay, it does. You might get a kick out of this. Years ago, I was at an organic market outside of DC, and I saw a woman looking at some raw dehydrated cookies and crackers, raw vegan products, and I walked over and said, "Do you eat a lot of raw food?" And she said, "No, but I eat a lot of other stuff." I said, "Well, it's kind of one or the other, isn't it?" And then she looked around and she leaned in. She said, "I eat a lot of meat." And I didn't say anything, but I must have had a horrified look on my face, because she said, "What's wrong with that?" And I said, "Well, you don't have the physiology of a meat eater." And she took a step back and looked at me sideways and she said, "You don't even know me." Okay. So for anyone that's not getting the joke, I don't have to know anyone. All humans have the same digestive physiology. It's every other species, every single Bengal tiger eats the same diet. Every bald eagle eats the same diet. Every rainbow trout eats the same diet. Every giraffe eats the same diet. Is it possible? Is it likely we're the only species where your optimal diet and my optimal diet are two different things? That's pretty unlikely to be the case. 1 out of 25 billion. It's not very likely when our systems are the same and our systems are adapted for a particular diet. So in fact, our systems are almost identical to the chimpanzees and bonobos, with whom we share about 99% of our DNA. So what I would say is that fruit is the optimal diet for the human body, that all humans are made as we're fruit eaters. We're called frugivores, right? And that means we eat a fruit-based diet. There can be soft leaves involved. There could be small amounts of nuts and seeds, but they're really too high in fat and protein for most of the time. But that this is ideal. And I know there's a lot of questions that come up in people's minds, right? You've heard them all. You probably know them all by heart. The first one I hear all the time is, well, yeah, but that's too much sugar, right? I mean, there are enough studies that demonstrate that fructose is bad for you. And unfortunately, people think this means that fruit is bad for them.
Right.
Okay. Now, the studies that they're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen a fructose study where they looked at people eating apples and oranges, right? What they're looking at is things like high fructose corn syrup. They're fractionated fructose products.
Right. But the cool thing is now with technology, you can have a continuous glucose monitor. And there's some people, if I feed them a melon or two, that will spike their blood sugar. So I think it is true that even though as a species we may have an ideal diet, it is true that different people have different metabolic responses. And it also turns out in this country anyways, 93% are not optimal metabolically. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't argue with anything you just said. However, I'm not sure that demonstrates that everyone shouldn't be eating fruit. Most people's bodies are out of balance. So I see people all the time who don't tolerate a fruit-based diet until I get them through a fast of 21 days or more. And then so far, I mean, it's interesting because I ran, I call it a laboratory of sorts. It wasn't anything like a laboratory, but for 12 years, I ran an internship program where people spent 4 months with me. And they started by fasting 21 days. Okay. And then 7 days were feeding. And then they spent 3 more months on site, and they had to exercise with me 5 days a week, meditate with me 7 days a week, eat all their meals with, there was a small group. There were 4 of them. There's usually one of me. And then there were 2 or 3 other staff members. And so, we'd often be 6 or 7 or 8 at a table. But, and that, I taught them all this stuff. So what we found was 127 people went through that program, several of them twice and one person 3 times over the years. And every single one of those people from 17 to 72, from about a dozen different countries or more, all different blood types, all different races, all those things, every single person thrived after fasting, when many of them actually said to me, yeah, but what am I going to do after? Like, they were talking about the program and said, I'm interested, but I can't eat fruit. I said, you'll be okay. If you're not okay, we'll work it out. We'll figure it, right? Never had an issue with anybody. Every single person was okay. Now, sometimes after the fast, it still took them a month or more to be okay. And the reason why, I believe, is because they're still working on rebalancing the body. There's plaque in the arteries. I haven't seen recent studies. The latest studies I saw were now probably 15 or more years old. I haven't looked. But back then, it said that the average 14-year-old's arteries were 40% occluded.
Right. That sounds right. And we're actually even seeing the beginnings of the occlusion and damage to blood vessels in 3-year-olds. I mean, it's happening really quickly, and it's scary.
It's very scary. Yeah. I mean, I saw another one that said the average 9-year-old's arteries were 30% occluded. So we have these tremendous systemic issues as a result of a poor diet. And there's one more factor, which might sound familiar. What if hydration was an issue? Now think about this, okay? Let's make the numbers ridiculous. I don't believe one could survive with half of the blood they should have in the body. But let's just pretend for a second that they could. They eat a bunch of mangoes. Mangoes are pretty sweet, right? If they're ripe. They're at the high end of the low range on the glycemic load chart. Okay, they're still low in the low glycemic load, but they're at the top of that range. So if you've got X number of grams of sugar going into the bloodstream, how is that going to affect the blood sugar reading if there's half as much blood? It would be twice as high.
Right.
Because blood sugar...
And I think that's one of the reasons why, sure, you can look up glycemic index, but that's a general calculation. It doesn't apply to an individual necessarily.
Well, first of all, let me clarify something for you, Josh, and this is important. It's actually not glycemic index that matters. Okay, glycemic index is actually nothing more than a measure of how quickly the carbohydrates are available to the body. Okay, but that's not an impact on blood sugar. Glycemic load is predictive of impact on blood sugar, and you're absolutely right. It's a prediction, and it's going to vary from person to person. And I tell people this all the time. It's going to be different. If we've got 30 people in the room, it could be different for every one of us. But it's predictive, and there's no question that if someone has full blood volume, they're going to be less affected than someone who has less than full blood volume. And, it'd be a very interesting study to do where we actually looked at level of hydration, dehydration, and how they're affected with a continuous glucose monitor, how they're affected by different substances. But I see this all the time. When people are fasting with me, we're measuring their blood sugar every day. If their blood volume drops, their blood sugar often goes up. If it drops overnight, let's say, they've been drinking 5 liters a day and they feel nauseous, they only get 3 liters in, we're usually going to see blood sugar higher the next day. If they drink more water again, blood sugar goes back down. So
Right.
this could be one of the reasons why. But I think there's other factors too. But
Sure.
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say another variable, and I think the public has basically been brainwashed on this, is that protein is very hard on the kidneys to digest. And what is the advice that almost everyone's getting from the media, at least in the United States, is you need to make sure you get enough protein.
Yeah.
No one talks about, well, if you get a lot of protein, that's going to be really tough on your kidneys and may cause some kidney damage.
Well, in fact, there are now more and more people saying exactly the opposite. I heard just today, I heard some MD who was parroting something some keto guy was saying. No, that's nonsense. We need protein for everything. Protein doesn't hurt you. It's actually good for your kidneys. You and I both know this is nonsense, and the studies are very clear about this. And I believe there are people out there who are being paid perhaps by the beef industry or big pharma, whatever. They're being paid to lie. They know better. And it's, I think doctors should be held to a higher standard because you've got, you're recognized as an expert in health, MDs, and because that people therefore are going to listen to MDs. You're going to listen to you more. I think someone who knowingly is out there disseminating false information with that license, I think it's a pretty serious crime, or should be. So you're absolutely right about this. And this is, of course, the next thing. After we get past the sugar issue, people say, well, if you're eating a fruit-based diet, where do you get your protein from? So the thing that most people don't understand is that protein is the building block of cell structure of every living cell. So today I got my protein from watermelon. I had breakfast a few hours ago. I usually eat at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And my first meal, if I eat it, second meal, it'll be after that. And that's all I've had today was half a small watermelon. That's where I got my protein from. I worked out for an hour today, as I do almost every day. Perfectly fine. I don't eat many calories, and I eat almost no concentrated proteins. Every once in a while, I'll eat some nuts or seeds. But again, I feel better when I don't eat them. And I have to be really careful because they're highly addictive. So I'm better off not starting because it's hard to stop.
Well, let's be clear. I mean, I think sweet fruit is also addictive, but from what you're saying, and I agree with you, it's a good addiction to have.
Well, I mean, I have no trouble stopping when like today, I thought I'd eat the whole watermelon. It wasn't that big. I ate half and didn't want any more. So I stuck the rest on a plate and stuck it in the fridge. It's fine. I still have mangoes from the mango festival that I bought unripe, and I now have enough. I could eat way more than I need to. But when I have a meal of mangoes, I'll have 2 or 3. I mean, there's some of them are very large mangoes, and I'll stop because, whereas I find it hard, like with junk food, as I'm sure you're well aware, it's designed. I mean, it's like in laboratories, they design it. They make it so that it's hard to stop eating it.
Right. They'll add salt, oil, and sugar and make it hyper palatable so that you want more and more, and your brain will actually crave it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't find that with fruit. It's actually a natural stop when the body has, when you've got your needs met, there's enough. I get this, and it actually loses its flavor. It's like, okay, that was good. If I try one more, my body will say, no, don't do that. That doesn't happen with processed food. It's not the same way. Even when it does, it's still hard to stop eating, right? It's crazy.
True.
Right. It's crazy how that works.
Yeah. Is it okay if we do kind of a lightning round, some quick questions?
Yeah,
Yes, no?
absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. So what's the most powerful benefit of fasting that no one talks about?
That's a hard question to answer because there are so many benefits. I mean, the way I would suggest we think about it.
And I don't think there are a lot of people talking about it.
Right. I mean, so I don't know if you're a boater, but there's an old boating saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. So every single aspect of our being physically, every physical aspect, every mental, every emotional, spiritual, every aspect is lifted when we get the garbage out of the body and give the body a chance to heal. So you're wearing glasses. I've got 3 sisters. We're all in our 60s. Every one of them wears glasses. Not my vision's still better than 20/20. They all have the wrinkles on the face that most people have. For people that are getting older, and I'm guessing that's a lot of your audience with Alzheimer's, I would suggest that we can reverse most aging. Okay, most aging. I believe a significant amount of what we think of as normal aging is actually chronic dehydration. And the only way we can get hydrated is we have to get the old material. I know this is controversial, but I see it with every client. I had a client last year, 27-year-old woman who had 10 bowel movements a day for 6 months after fasting with me. Okay, eating 3 meals a day. A lot of old, hard materials leaving the body. And that stuff sits in the small intestine like a giant sponge. Okay, I wish we could prove this. I'm hoping someday we can do carbon dating that will say, that's from July 23rd, 2 years ago, whatever. But only when we get that material out of the body is it possible to see hydration come up. And so hydrating the body, I believe really is the key. Hygiene says there's one disease, it's toxemia. But a dehydrated body is incapable of detoxifying on an ongoing basis in real time, very efficiently. So when we get the body hydrated, everything changes. And I really believe we measure a lot of things. I believe hydration is the single most important metric.
Got it. And how would you measure it? Do you measure it through the urine specific gravity? Do you measure it through a blood test, or or do you measure it through the pulse pressure you talked about earlier, or do you measure it?
No. And I'd love to find better ways. I don't think any of those things would give you a valid measure of hydration. They would tell you other things, which are in some cases are related to hydration. Certainly pulse pressure is related to hydration, because if you don't have full blood volume, if the pulse pressure isn't where it should be, then you're dehydrated. And what I mean by that is making enough blood is pretty important to the body, right? Your body is pretty smart. It's going to make sure that your brain, heart, lungs, liver, kidney, pancreas, thyroid, gallbladder, and blood are going to have what they need, like liver, kidneys. They're going to get everything they need. So if there's enough water in the body's going to take water. And this is what I believe aging is. It's the body taking water from joints and skin and eyes and discs and so forth to make sure that the more important systems in the body have what they need. So not having enough blood means you're dehydrated, but having enough blood could simply be the result of drinking enough, even though the body's dehydrated. We use a pretty sophisticated bioimpedance device. It's a scale that this is actually what it was designed for, is to measure hydration. Is it perfect? No. They claim it's 99%. Is that true? I don't know. Probably not.
Right.
But it gives us a pretty good sense of what's going on for people. And in fact, someday, this wouldn't be appropriate for this. You'd lose all your listeners. Someday I'd be happy to sit down with you and show you what we actually look at, because it's amazing the information we can get from these things. So that's the way we do it.
Got it. So what fruit would you live on forever if you had to?
If I only had to pick one fruit?
Yeah, one fruit.
It would be watermelon.
Nice.
My absolute favorite.
Nice. And what are the most overrated health foods or health food?
Again, that's a really difficult one because there's so many. So if it's packaged and processed, it's not. I don't think it's food. Tofu. There's a good example. I wouldn't eat that.
It's highly processed, right? You can't find a tofu tree or
Not anymore. They seem to have all gone.
All right. What's the most underrated health practice?
I think it's fasting.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. And do you think Alzheimer's is a disease or simply a symptom of toxicity?
Well, it's a really good question, and I don't pretend to have any expertise with Alzheimer's. I'm actually curious what your opinion is.
Yeah. So my opinion is it's a constellation. Every case is different because you're dealing with 30 to 200 root causes.
You said that earlier. That's amazing.
Yeah. And some of those 30 to 200 causes are toxins.
Right.
But we give labels to disease and disease. Yeah. So I think the bottom line is it's complicated. Yeah.
It's complicated for sure. Yeah. Again, I mean, was hygiene right that toxicity, toxemia was everything? Maybe not. It's certainly a factor, as it is in Alzheimer's disease. It may be a factor in almost every condition, maybe every condition. I don't know. Again, I wonder whether hydration is a significant factor. Ultimately, of course, a lot of that, we get dehydrated because of diet. My favorite way to talk about this, you've eaten corn chips at some point, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. As a kid, sure. All the time. I love that.
How much water would you guess they have in them?
Corn chip. I mean, I know they got a lot of salt and they press all the water out, probably minimal.
It's minimal. It's a lot of people say 0, but white bread is 50% water.
Well, actually, let me turn this around. I would argue it's negative from the standpoint if you add a lot of salt into someone, you're removing the free water.
You're absolutely right. And my point about this is, I mean, they're actually 3% water is what the studies say. I've Googled it, 3% water. Now, so here's the question. When those corn chips come back out of your body, are they as dry as when they went in?
Hopefully not.
You better hope not. Exactly. You better hope not. That would be a very rough afternoon, right? So they go in 3% water. They come out still as 75% water. Where's the water coming from?
I mean, hopefully you're taking in something else with water. Yeah.
It's ultimately, it's coming from your body. And this is why everyone's dehydrated, because we've all grown up eating things that are completely unnatural. In nature, whether you're talking about frugivores like chimps and bonobos, you're talking about carnivores like lions and tigers, you're talking about foliivores like deer or giraffes, insectivores like anteaters. Every species is eating a high water content diet. Because the carnivore bites through the jugular vein, drinks all the blood, eats the water-rich internal organs, and then eats the muscle without cooking all the water out of it and putting it between 2 dry pieces of bread. Right?
You're right. You're exactly right.
They're getting mostly water. Every species is. But I don't know about you. I grew up eating dry cereal and toast and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and cookies and crackers and chips. These things don't have any. I mean, again, yeah, maybe they have 20, 30, even 50% water, but it's less than stool, which means it's taking water out of your system. Okay. And so I really believe this is maybe the most important unrecognized issue is hydration.
Sure. And what is one supplement you would never take? Or do you take any supplements for that matter?
I don't take any supplements at all.
Okay.
I haven't taken a supplement in 32 and a half years. And this is controversial because I'm not sure if this is clear yet. I know you know, but I'm not sure if anyone listening here knows that for the last 33 and a half years, I've lived on mono fruit meals and simple green salads. Every once in a while with a more prepared raw vegan meal, generally made with fruits, leaves, maybe some vegetables, occasionally some nuts and seeds. So as a 40-year vegan, theoretically, I should have to take B12, but I don't. And that could explain some things going on here. Because, you can get brain damage without enough B12.
Sure, nerve damage.
No,
yeah.
I mean, my B12 levels have been fine. And this, again, it's controversial, but your gut biome, the 10 trillion bacteria roughly live in the colon, produce all the B vitamins every day. Now, some people say, yeah, but it's too far downstream. You can't absorb that. I have seen several scientists saying, well, some people seem to be able to get what they need from there. And again, it won't be a surprise now. My belief is that you can absorb that if you're hydrated enough. I believe this is actually the key. So I don't supplement with B12 and never have, and I don't eat animal products. Now, vitamin D is something that I would take if I found myself stuck in London, Seattle, Portland, Scandinavia, someplace where you can't possibly get enough sun. You and I are both in South Florida. Okay. I spent 20 years in Costa Rica. I spent 6 months in the last 2 years in Texas and Houston. So I'm in places where I can get sun, and I get sun every day. If the sun, I control my own schedule. If I have back-to-back calls and a call ends 10 minutes before the hour, I go outside for 10 minutes and get some sleep.
Nice.
So are there supplements I would never take? There are probably a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot. First of all, as I'm sure you're well aware, most supplements pass right through the body and are actually toxic to the body. Many mineral supplements are made from the forms of mineral, because every mineral comes in various forms of minerals that the body can't really use very well, and it can actually be toxic to us. So I wouldn't take any of those. But I firmly believe, I mean, there's now multiple studies, dozens of studies that show, for instance, if you live in one of those places I mentioned and you can't get enough sunlight, you might need to take vitamin D. But don't take any more than you need to, because the more you take, the higher the risk of bone fracture, which is crazy since we need vitamin D for healthy bones. B12, if you're not able to get what you need, then you might need to take it, because it's absolutely critical to us. But studies show that the more B12 you take, the higher the risk of death from all causes. So you want to take only what you need to take to maintain reasonable levels.
What's the most toxic food in the average diet that you see?
It's definitely some ultra processed food. I don't know exactly which one. That would be hard to say. There's so many of them. I mean, there's a lot of, a grocery store today has more than 50,000 different items, edible items. My guess is there's probably less than 50 that are actually food, maybe 100 in some places, but the vast majority of things in there are things that no one should ever consume. Probably, and of course, it's interesting too. I don't know. I'm guessing you've got listeners in many places. In the U.S., you can buy Lucky Charms at any grocery store, and it contains all kinds of toxic ingredients that are outlawed in most other countries, but not here, because it's cheaper to make that way, and our lawmakers don't seem to really care that much about what happens.
Sure, and it's got a lot of added salt, oil, and sugar in addition to a lot of these dyes. And
exactly.
So what? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what's the best time of day to eat if you're eating?
Well, the only time to eat is when you're hungry, but when you're actually hungry. And unfortunately, it's funny. I think you talked about being surprised that you weren't hungry, right, when you fast. But really, no one should be hungry when they fast, because the body is getting everything it needs from your own fat reserves and a little bit of muscle. And so there's no need for food. People think we run on food. We actually run on microelectric current. The body uses food to make that. But if in the absence of food, my body's going to make electricity by using my own fat reserves, right? So you should only eat when your body actually wants food. And when it actually wants food, you're not going to have belly-based symptoms. You're not going to feel weak or tired or dizzy or hangry. You're going to have a pleasant tickling sensation in the back of the throat. And when that happens, eating would be a good idea. If your body's clean enough and you don't eat, you'll still be fine.
Got
for
it.
a while.
So, yeah. So coffee enemas, yes or no?
Personally, I would only do mocha lattes.
Mocha lattes, okay.
Mocha latte. And around Halloween, pumpkin spice lattes.
Pumpkin spice, okay.
Yeah. No, I don't think we should ever do enemas. Not ever. I think there are times when there's something right there at the back door, you can't get it out. It's too large, too dry, too hard. You can't move it, and you're in significant pain. In that case, I would recommend an enema. Otherwise, I wouldn't do them. Coffee, I believe, is toxic to us, and it doesn't matter which end you put it in. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. And what's your favorite quote or mantra you live by?
Tough questions here, Josh. There are so many quotes I really, really love. One of my favorites is Groucho Marx quote. He said, "Outside of a dog, a book is man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read."
Wow. That's great.
There's a lot of great quotes. I think, and I'm sorry, I'm right now I'm having trouble thinking of one in particular, but I think in terms of a mantra, it's important to understand that we're creating everything all the time. And I think a lot of people have lost hope because life hasn't turned out the way they wanted it to. And it could be a physical issue. It could be a financial issue. It could be relationship issues. I think we can alter most of that. Sometimes it's a little too late, but I think caught early enough, there's very little that we can't shift. And so, I always want to leave people remembering that, hey, if you want to feel and function better than ever, you probably can do that. It's usually not too late to do that. We just have to be willing to take responsibility and do what is sometimes difficult to do.
That's great. And if someone wants to reach out to you to fast or just to talk with you or communicate with you, how can people find you?
Well, you can find me on most of the biggest social media channels. I'm on Facebook. It's Loren Lockman .official on Facebook and Instagram. Loren Lockman _official on YouTube. That's a new one. The old one is just Loren Lockman. And you can reach me at info@tanglewoodwellnesscenter.com. I should say Tanglewood Wellness Center unfortunately no longer exists after 29 years. I'm still working with people remotely, and we're working on building a new website because that one, now still reflects some things that are no longer happening. But it's still, you can go to the website, you can see what we used to do. There's a lot of information there about fasting. You can click on Contact Us, and I respond to those messages personally.
Wow. Loren, thank you so much for your radical wisdom and your passion for natural healing, and really for challenging us to rethink everything we know about disease, aging, and the body's ability to heal. So really appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Josh. I very much appreciate you. It's you're a rare bird, an MD with an open mind. There's others. I know many, but not most of them, unfortunately. And you're not only are you an MD with an open mind, you're a super nice guy, and I appreciate your generosity and your kindness. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share. I know a lot of this stuff sounds crazy to most people, but the results are undeniable.
Exactly. Well, peace and plants. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir.